I'm absolutely delighted to be here today to talk to Dinana Hamade, who I'll introduce in a minute, in relation to Middle Eastern issues. As we know, David Bell has been doing a series in relation to the Middle East, and this one is about family law. So welcome, Dinana.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure being here, and can't wait to start our conversation.
So before we do that, let me tell you a bit about Dinana. When you talk family law in the Middle East and under Sharia, Dinana is undoubtedly the right lawyer, not because she's one of the few UAE national lawyers with rights of audience before all UAE courts, including the DIFC, and not because Dinana is the one woman lawyer from the Middle East who's made her mark in the practice of family law, especially as a Sharia expert and the only UAE lawyer ranked by Chambers in the high net worth private client space, but because, and I know this, she is passionate about family law and wants to make a difference. So Dinana and I met via the International Academy of Family Lawyers. We've shared many discussions about family law, as well as having lots of fun together over the years. We've been to many countries, and obviously a great shame that we can't do that at the moment, but great to see you, Dinana. It'd be lovely to be in conversation with you this morning.
Thank you, Susan. Same here.
So my first question is obviously about COVID. That's all we're talking about at the moment. How has the COVID pandemic changed the way you practice family law in the UAE?
So let me start by going back to when the pandemic actually started having its impact in the UAE. And it took us until March in the UAE to decide that we have been impacted by the pandemic. We've had people who are testing positive, and immediately we had a lockdown afterwards. So it was just too shocking for us from February onwards that everything would be just closed down. No airlines ever would just land at our airport, the busiest airport in the world. So mostly for us, it was quite a shock. And as lawyers, we saw the resolution number 30 issued in March 2020 that the courts of Dubai issued for the postponement of all judicial sessions, remote working having in place, and the use of smart services in Dubai courts. Now, that does not mean that we never used the electronic system and the smart services of the courts. We did use it, but not in any way that would require us to attend hearings remotely. So that was the thing that for lawyers was quite not the norm, and we needed to be trained to do it, just like the judges, just like the whole judicial system that was not really used to it. So by the end of the lockdown, around the end of April, beginning of May, we woke up in the morning and we found ourselves at home, sitting before our laptops, computers, with this big screen, and a judge on the other side talking to us. It was quite surprising. I can't tell you how different it was to be at home wearing your own black robe for the court and, fixing your shayla, and you're not really in no environment that would ever give you that feeling that you should be doing what you're doing. So this is how it began. And I have to say that we're proud in the UAE to feel that we were one of the first courts in the world that took remote working and virtual hearings on board immediately, while many countries took very long to take it that further. So all hearings, Court of Cassation, Court of Appeal, Court of First Instance, including the family courts, were mainly remote until today. The only difference now is that cross-examinations of witnesses and hearings that would require, like attestations, people to be in person, are now received at court, and the court has opened its doors back, but the judges mostly will not be present. They will still be at home conducting their hearings from wherever they were, home or their own place, and the courts would still have people coming in, mainly for cross-examinations, for hearings testimonies.
So can I just check, therefore, you hadn't had a backlog of cases because almost instantly you changed to this remote system?
That was the one unique thing that we have to say, that Dubai courts, UAE courts in general, took on board in a very efficient way. We never had a backlog of cases, which was amazing. So by March, starting with the resolution that was issued, by May, we were already on a system that allowed us to have hearings with the three courts, even the Court of Cassation.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, we've had some backlogs, and one of the things we found is that there's been a lot more out of court dispute resolution, so mediation and arbitration, because people are choosing not to go into the court system during this pandemic, but dealing with things in that way. Have you found something similar or not?
Well, I have to say that the most obvious impact that the corona had on family law is, of course, people who wanted to get married. You can imagine during the lockdown, during all of these issues, no more gatherings, hotels, ballrooms were completely out of reach. So people wanted to get married still. So the courts provided an online service for marriages. So marriages were still allowed. However, divorces, which I found quite, ironic a bit, that the courts decided that divorces are not so urgent. So whoever wants to divorce can wait. So that was exactly what happened. Divorces were not allowed to get through the court for almost a month and a half, until the conciliation services of Dubai courts provided itself on an online service, and the courts picked up from there, accepting cases. Now, that does not mean that the divorce cases that were registered beforehand, the hearings were still going on, conducted, but the new divorce cases were not, accepted by the courts until a little later. The other impact, I can say, that was quite serious in our jurisdiction, especially, was visitations. And it was a heartbreaking experience, even for us lawyers, to see parents who couldn't see their children for almost 2 to 3 months. Because in our jurisdiction, our law, visitations are given to the father, usually, who is not normally a custodian, or in the event that the mother is not the custodian, is the one with the visitation. The visitation centers that were provided for the visitations to take place by law were closed, and are closed until now. So many people suffered not seeing their children during the lockdown and afterwards because of the visitation centers being closed. I can say the other areas that were impacted are the travel bans, which are very common in our jurisdiction and would not be lifted, even when people were seeking repatriation.
Right, so quite a lot of difference between what you saw and what we did. We had online divorces already, so they continued. People couldn't necessarily get married because of the groups of people involved in the marriage, but we found that particularly now we seem to have loads of prenups. So people who have been unable to marry to date and people who postponed their wedding to next year, there's actually quite a lot of prenups out there. And similarly, at the moment, for us, a lot of relocation cases where people were unable to move during the immediate lockdown, but now subsequently, obviously, can move, although with limitations. And so lots of cases of leave to remove to different jurisdictions. So some similarities, some changes. I think you already had some amendments to your family law in 2019 that weren't relevant to COVID. So were those provisions amended, and if so, why?
Well, it seems that our legislator in 2019 decided that divorce cases were blamed, or that the rise in divorce cases, the huge numbers of divorce cases that were reported in the UAE and especially in Dubai were blamed on the personal status law 28 of 2005, which I don't agree with. Allow me to say that. The law is never responsible for divorce cases and should have, if it should have been amended, should have amended for different purposes, not to stop people divorcing. And usually, who can you stop divorcing in the UAE? Under Sharia law and under our law is the woman, is the woman in the marriage, not the man, because a Muslim man, can throw his divorce without using the law or without relying on the law. So what happened is that the legislator had, I'm not going to use serious words here, but has limited the ability of women to approach the courts for divorce, and usually it's divorce for harm. And now we can see that the courts are dealing with divorces filed by women in a very different way, in a way that we have never seen in our jurisdiction. The amendments were really targeting 118, 120, and 121 of the law, where arbitrators were used, were appointed by the court to see if there was a way to conciliate between the parties. And arbitrators by Sharia are usually two parties, two people from the families of the husband and the wife. And now, because most people wouldn't have their families involved, so the arbitrators would end up being imams from the mosques or people who the court has on its list. So what happened is now is that the arbitrators are not used anymore, and the judge, based on his own discretion, would find no harm and would be able to immediately dismiss the case from a single judge at the court of first instance, which actually means that every woman filing for divorce in Dubai, in the UAE, her case would be dismissed. This is the status quo. So if you have a chance to get this woman to change her mind, that's what she's gonna face, a dismissal of her case. She's already hired lawyers, she's already brought the witnesses, she's already done the whole homework. And then she will find her case to be dismissed. And she's either gonna appeal it or file again to be able to get the two arbitrators to be appointed. It's just an amendment that was, in my opinion, again, in my opinion, it reminds me of the series, The Good Wife, if you remember that judge.
I do.
My opinion, okay, so I'm just actually saying in my opinion that this is not necessarily the right thing that we wanted, but this is the status quo that we have to deal with here now.
And can I ask a question then, Diana? Does that mean that when they appeal, if they do appeal, are they likely to be successful in their appeal? So it's just delaying it rather than preventing it?
Unfortunately, I've had my experience with a number of cases, and up to 80% were denied.
Are there no human rights arguments that you can put forward?
You wouldn't be able to use the human rights argument, because mainly it is not considered one of the human rights that should be dealt with in any way. I really don't know if it's like a right of a woman to divorce. It's in the mind of the legislator, we're trying to save families.
Right.
Now, at the expense of whom? This is where the dilemma of the whole thing would be quite obvious. Now, generations of women now would have to deal with this. And for young women now, they're actually thinking twice before getting married and thinking of how to use techniques that were available in the Aqd Nikah, which they never actually ever thought of before, like giving herself the right to divorce through the Aqd Nikah. And this is a big step culturally for this whole part of the world. So we had other two articles in the law amended, 71 and 72. And these articles should have been taken out, not amended, because the legislator did not really need to put all that effort into amending them in a way where they turned out to be not clear, not well versed it's a pity to see that the legislator made such an effort to amend 2 articles. One of them would prohibit women from leaving their homes without the permission of the husband or the father. And of course, we screamed loud against this article for years. The other one is that a woman should be punished by not having her alimony paid in the event that her husband finds her not in obedience. And that again was a very serious issue that we had to deal with for years. Now, there has been an amendment, which we were so glad to know that finally these 2 articles are amended, but unfortunately, they did not meet the expectations of most of the legal experts, lawyers, even clients, I suppose. And we are hoping that the 2 amendments that took place in 2019 and 2020 for the same 2 articles are just, just taken out in a way by just striking out these 2 articles, which are not necessarily, be part of any law worldwide. So this is what we're hoping now, that the legislator will just take them out completely.
It sounds so difficult, and I just wonder whether there's lots of people, lots of women like you in positions of power who are leading the charge against these sorts of issues, or how does it work? Do you have a lobby group? How does that work?
So luckily, we've had what we call the Federal National Council, which is mostly like the parliament in the UK, where people are represented. Again, this is not a parliament, but it takes upon itself some part of the legislation, some part of the laws in the country. And now, I have to say, 50% of the membership of the Federal National Council are women. And it was a law that was passed last year. So I'm glad to say that we've had women who are calling upon the legislator to take into consideration a number of laws that have had, I don't know, some articles that were not at all in line with the vision that you see in the UAE in empowering women, in having women ministers. We have women who are highly educated in this country, and they've been able to reach and become, astonishing members of the society. So now I can see that women are calling upon the legislator to take a stand on serious issues that are impacting women.
I'm so pleased to hear that. We're just going to change tack a bit now. We're going to talk about expats living in the UAE and how they're dealing with their family law cases. Have you seen any changes in relation to how that's being dealt with, and especially in the event of repatriation?
Corona had its impact, of course, on many expats living in the UAE. Some of them had been away, could not come back. There were like seriously heartful cases that when you heard about like a mother and a father who left 2 little children in Dubai, the lockdown was there, they could never come back, there were no flights to bring back people. It was painful, and you could see it, you could read it in newspapers, it was on social media. So many people at that point decided they may want to go back home, and we've seen a lot of repatriation. It wasn't really noticed as far as family law so much, except in succession planning. So you could see people who had wills coming to lawyers asking questions. Family law itself had the impact of people trying to lift travel bans of their children, and the other party was sometimes not in the country because they've actually been out and they never could come back. And the courts had to decide on a matter that was for granted taken for years, the way it was, that 2 parents are living in this country. So there has been quite like an evolution in the travel ban for a while, but now things are back to what we saw before and what we had before, which I was hoping with some time to get done with the way we held children in this country under a travel ban when their parents were not necessarily from the same country, when one of them wanted to go back and the other party was not even in the country anymore. So this is something for the legislator to start dealing with. Remember, we are a nation, we are a country that is not signatory to the Hague Convention, and we have our serious issues with people who are from different countries living in this country and having travel bans on their children. The other thing I would say that impacted some of the families, the expats living here, are the amendments I mentioned. Because now, not every expat woman wants to pay that money to get into a court where she knows that her right to divorce will be denied. Now, even if she applies for her own law, which is possible with Dubai courts, with UAE courts in general upon the same law, her chances with the court are as fine as not being an expat or a non-Muslim.
So on that basis, do you see a lot of women forum shopping to get out of the UAE into other jurisdictions to try and get their divorces in other jurisdictions?
That's what I'm seeing now. But again, I warn them all the time that when you get me a foreign judgment and you want me to enforce it here, I would still have the same problems that I had earlier. So it's like a limbo, like you really can't get anywhere to do anything.
Yeah. And we're moving on again, and we're talking about Muslims and non-Muslims in the family courts in the UAE, and how that they will be impacted by the Abraham Accord with Israel. So perhaps first of all, it may be helpful if you could explain to our listeners about the Abraham Accord, whether or not it is actually an accord. Is it consensual? What does it mean?
Well, we know that Israel has always been considered an enemy for years and years, since 1948, since the occupation of Palestine. Most of the Arab world had boycotted Israel by many laws, locally and of course on the level of the Arab world. The Arab League had a convention between the Arab countries, among the Arab countries, and they all had signed up to it. Now, the UAE was one of those countries that had boycotted Israel for years, although we knew for a fact that we had Jewish people living in this country, Jews, who had passports that were not necessarily Israeli passports, but they never could have their own worship publicly. They couldn't really be seen as Jews. But now we've had last month a new, I don't know if I may call it a new, it's just an accord. And it is an agreement, it's a bilateral agreement with the Israeli government. And what we call is an Abraham Accord, which means that we are people of the same Abraham religious origin, and we should enjoy a good relationship with the people of Israel and not necessarily boycott them just because they are Jews or they're Israelis. And this has had, of course, its echo all over the world. And now we see that I actually see Jewish people around wearing their, like traditional clothes, being among us in restaurants, and which is something very new for us. Now, the question for family law is, we've always had in our courts Muslims and non-Muslims, and this question I'm asked so often, Suzanne, that I laugh because I really don't have an answer for it. So what does it mean, Diana, that we are non-Muslims and we're going to Dubai courts? Honestly, doesn't mean anything. Because the same law applies to all of us, whether Muslims or non-Muslims. The courts just had it as a way to say we have two types of people who come to register cases. So it's easier if we say, these are Muslims, these are non-Muslims. But what happens is at family courts is that we all have the same law that apply to all of us. And if you are not necessarily a non-Muslim, but a holder of a passport, which is not UAE, you can ask to apply your own law. Now, of course, the judges have had this custom of applying Sharia when you're a Muslim automatically. But this by law is not right. By law, it says you hold a passport that is not UAE passport, apply your law, and we'll be happy to apply it for you. Ask for the application, and we'll apply it for you. So now I can see that the Israelis would be just part of the family law if they become clients, or they just seek the family law courts in the UAE, and they will be just treated as non-Muslims because they just have the same, like the Christians and the Buddhists and the Hindus, that we have all religions living in this country, and they're all, entitled and eligible to seek the Dubai courts and the UAE courts in general services. The only thing that the Jewish women will find when they come to our country is that they can marry Muslim men. So this is just like Christian women marrying Muslim men, when the Hindu women, the Buddhist women would not be able to do that. So remember, a Muslim man can marry only an Abraham religion women. So this is the only thing that I've been asked actually by women now, Israelis online, if they marry a UAE, what does it mean to them? And it's funny because this is the first question a family lawyer will be asked, I guess, just because this is how I'm seen.
And does that make you feel optimistic for the society more generally to be more open to other religions, or not really?
We've always been very open to our religion. You can imagine our kids grew up in the UAE, going to schools with every religion you can think of in the world, with every nationality you can think of in the world. So we're just very open society, open-minded, open-hearted, honestly. Like, we really want to live with everyone and we enjoy it. This is what Dubai is known for. Now, the Jews were just the exception, but now they're welcome. That's all I can say.
Now, sort of looking through our glasses and thinking what on earth is going to happen in the future, what do you think is the future of your family law practice in the UAE following the changes forced by the pandemic? Will you, I suppose the sorts of questions we're asking here is, will you work from home a few days a week, or will you go into the office? Will the courts be a hybrid of sometimes being done remotely via Teams or Zoom and sometimes in person? What do you think the outcome might be for our world?
Well, you would say the same. The virtual hearings have saved time. Have saved our time. We have to admit it. Being in one place, able to attend multiple hearings in one day, for me, in courts of Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Sharjah, it's unbelievable. I honestly cannot believe it sometimes. When I'm sitting, I'm just switching from one court to the other, where I had to either drive a whole day, stay in Abu Dhabi to attend my hearings, and forget about the rest of the hearings in other courts. I would have had someone else to appear on my behalf. So things have changed. There has been a lot of saving of time and effort. And of course, we're using Teams mainly. But again, does that really feel like the courts we're used to, we want to appear before? It has taken a lot of us. I mean, even the way we dress up and sit there, it's not the same. And I tell my daughter, who's gonna be a lawyer just like myself soon, she goes, oh my God, that's amazing. Who wants to go to court? And I'm like, no, the court is amazing. You don't know how different the court is, how the building, the feeling when you're in court. So I think the next generation will not know what we have lived, what we have experienced. The special environment of a court, appearing before a judge or on a bench, that's not the same. So how would that be a constant thing after, if we ever get done with the corona, start with? I really don't know. But I know that there has been a lot of environment issues that have been dealt with properly. We don't use our cars as much as before. We're really at ease with ourselves. The tension of running back and forth all day is not there. So there's a lot of pros. But again, how long would it take for us to get used to it and accept it as it is? For family law, I think the witnesses that are a must, and we will have to do it in court because it's not really done well online. So we would still need the courts for that. The expert opinions that we need sometimes in certain cases, that would have also to be at court because of the evidence that has sometimes to be presented. But otherwise, I think it's just happening, Suzanne. I think for everywhere. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think similar sorts of views. I suppose one point I would pick up on is how difficult it is for young people to learn. You know, when you're in an office, you roll back your chair and have a chat with somebody and you discuss the case together. And of course, you can do that on Zoom or Teams, or you can have a phone call, but you miss a bit of the general sort of chit chat and almost the learning by osmosis. And that's one of the things in terms of generation. I feel really sorry for people that they've lost out for a period, at least, in relation to that. And I think how you learn this job is tricky if you're not all working together.
Yes, indeed. I agree with you on that all the way. I remember during the lockdown, luckily, I'm part of the Emirates Lawyers Association. And I could swear if I was not part of this Emirates Lawyers Association, I would have never been able to know what was happening. The way we were connected on WhatsApp kept me in the loop. Otherwise, the disconnect that took place was just serious and too difficult. I mean, some lawyers were just felt lost. They didn't even know what was happening. Because when you don't go to court on a daily basis, or almost at least twice a week, you don't know really what's happening.
Yeah, and almost as well, the other thing that I think is quite tough is BD. It's sort of fine if you know people and you've got their numbers and you can call them up or you can email them, have a chat. But I think, again, for younger people in particular, if you haven't established your network, that's quite hard. And of course, the thing that you and I are missing are our international academy conferences around the world. Well, obviously, they may not be the same in the future. And we're lucky we've got established relationships. But I really am hoping that we do get back to meeting each other and, you know, chewing the cud, chatting to each other about all sorts of things, whether it's the law or, as we do often, about society and how things are in the UAE different to England, etc., etc. So I think they're the sorts of things that we're missing.
Yes, I do agree. Totally.
It has been a fabulous 3/4 of an hour chatting to you, finding out about what's happening in the UAE and more broadly, not just family law, a bit about society and religion. So great to have so many insights from you. I'd really like to thank you, Dinana, for being my guest today and chatting to me.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure. And I really miss you. You know that.
I miss you too.
IFL dinners, and, you know, it was just a different thing altogether. Thanks to David. Thanks to the club that has put us together again. And I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you very much.